the Module 4 end of module review. So the first question is asking about the third grade classes at Lincoln School using 5 identical buses. So we know there's going to be 5 buses. There are a total of 50 seats on each bus. So we're going to write down that there were 5 buses. And there's 50 seats on each bus. So then it says all of the seats on the 4 buses were filled. So we know that bus 1 has 50, bus 2 has 50, bus 3 has 50, and bus 4 has 50. But then it says that on the 5th bus, only 4/5 of the seats were filled. So now we're down here and we're going to figure out what 4/5 of 50 is. And we know that the word of tells us that we need to multiply. So we have 50 divided by 5 is 10, and 10 times 4 is 40. So this bus only has 40 people on it. Then it's telling me that 1/8 of all of the passengers on the buses were adults. So first I have to add up all of the passengers. So 50 plus 50 plus 50 plus 50 plus 40 is 240 people are on the bus. And 1/8 of those passengers, and of means to multiply, are on the bus, were adults. And when I do this, it's 240 divided by 8 is 30, and 30 times 1 is 30. So there were 30 adults on all the buses. Question 2. We needed to write a word phrase that represents this. So this is 6 times the, and we look in that 36 plus 9 means the sum of 36 and 9. Next, the decimal grid. So we're working in decimals, not in fractions, because it tells me that it is a decimal grid down below. So right away, the first thing I notice is that it's decimals. And I'm going to look, we have, this is filled in, filled in, filled in, and if I count down, I will see that 8 of these tenths are filled in because a decimal grid has 100 total, and each of these is worth 10. So I have 8 tenths, and I can write 8 tenths like this. And then I go from looking at that to looking at all my x's. And if I look at my x's going across, I have 4 tenths that are filled. So I'm multiplying it by 4 tenths, and I end up with 32. And I need to jump my decimal. I jumped in 1 spot, 2 spots. So I jump in 1, 2, and that shows me 32 hundredths. And 32 hundredths is this should match this area right here. And that's the answer to my decimal grid. Okay, so down here now, for what values of k would the product of this be greater than 12? So my number that goes up there needs to be, we need to make sure that the fraction is greater than 1. So any answer, any number greater than 3. Because 3 over 3 would be 1, and that wouldn't work. But 4 over 3 would be greater than 1. 5 over 3 would be greater than 1. So anything that's greater than 3, and that's all because this says greater than. Next problem, it says during a bike ride, 4 friends equally share a half a pound of goldfish. what amount of goldfish did each friend receive? And you ask yourself, am I cutting up the friends? That would be silly. Or am I cutting up my goldfish or splitting it up? So I'm going to take my goldfish and I'm going to split it up between my 4 friends. For those of you who like a picture, I have my half of goldfish, and I'm going to divide it up by 4 people, and I end up with this one spot right here for one person, which is 1/8. Some of you like the keep change flip way, so if I keep, the K is right here, I keep 1/2. The C tells me to change that to multiplication, and the flip tells me to flip that upside down, which would give me 1/4, and that's another way that gives me 1/8. Write an expression using multiplication that has a value greater than 1/2. So right away, I'm going to take my half and multiply. And the first thing I'm going to do, because it says greater, I want a fraction that is greater than 1. So an example of a fraction that's greater than 1, I'm going to pick 5/4, because 5 is bigger than 4, and when the numerator is bigger than the denominator, it's an improper fraction, which means it's greater than 1. Okay. A preschool teacher has 5/10 of a liter of water. She gives each of her 20 students a container and a 3 milliliter spoon. And the first thing I notice right away is that this is liters and this is milliliters. She then asks her students to put 2 spoonfuls of water into the containers, and they want to know how many milliliters will be left after all 20 students fill their containers. Well, since I see that I want my answer to be in milliliters, I'm going to start by converting my 5/10 of a liter into milliliters. And we all know how to do this doing King Henry. And we're going to jump from our liters to our milliliters. We jump to the right 3 times. So we go 1, 2, 3. We fill zeros into the empty spaces. So we know we're going to end up with 500 milliliters. So that's what the teacher started with. She gives each of her 20 students that 3 milliliter spoon, but they're going to do this twice. So every time they have their 3-liter spoon, they're going to do it twice. So we know that they're going to do 6 milliliters. And then there is 20 students each, and they're each doing 6 milliliters. And so that's going to be 120 milliliters the students will be putting into the container. So if the teacher started with 500 milliliters and the students used 120 of them, then we are left with 380 milliliters at the end. Next question. We just simplify each expression so we know that we're using PEMDAS, and we should always have that on the side to help us. So here we're going to use what's in parentheses first, and we have 36 divided by 3, and we end up with 12. On this one we have 2 times 16, which is 32. And over here we have 9 times 8, which is 72. And over here when we have PEMDAS, we see that we multiply first. So we're going to do 6 plus 8, and then that's 14. Next question. Which statement can you make about the value of the product of these two numbers? Well, when we look at this and we see that we're multiplying this number is less than 1. And we're multiplying it times 7. So the answer is going to be less than 7. That's for the first start of it. And if I wanted to look at it the other way, I can also say to myself, okay, let's look at the number 7. That's greater than 1. So my answer is going to be greater than this other factor. So it's going to be less than 7, but it's going to be greater than 5/12. Next is question 10. Andrew made a Lego building of his house. His house is 30.5 feet long. The dimensions were 1/25 the dimensions of Andrew's house. What's the length in feet of the building? So it's 1/25 of the dimensions. Of tells me to multiply. The biggest thing here is when I have a mixed number, I have to make it improper. So I'm going to rewrite the 1/25. I'm going to multiply it, and I remember 2 times 30 is 60. And then 60 plus the 1 is 61. So that gives me my 61, and I keep the denominator the same. And I have 61/50ths, which I cannot leave as 61/50ths. So I have to divide it back, 61 divided by 50. And when I divide it back, it goes in once, and 11/50ths is left over. And my answer is in feet. Question 11. Colleen collected 30 9/10 kilograms of paper. 2/3 of the paper that tells me to multiply was newspapers, and it says what's the total amount of newspapers. So we're going to find 2/3 of 30 9/10. And as we just said before, we cannot leave things as mixed numbers. We have to make them improper. So we're going to rewrite our 2/3. And we're going to change this to an improper. So 10 times 30 is 300, plus 9 is 309. And we keep the denominator the same, which is 10. And we end up with 618 over 30. And we have to do some division. Some of you might have to go to the side like this to help you because it's too big of a number to do in your head, and that's totally okay to do and actually encouraged to do. So my answer would be 20 18/30. And then we can simplify that if we wanted to, and we come out with 20 3/5 kilograms. Because up here I divided these by 6. Next. Each lap around Rockland Lake is 3 3/4 miles. Erin ran 2/3 of a lap before her knee started to hurt. How many miles did Erin run before she got hurt? So she ran 2/3 of a lap, and a whole lap is 3 3/4 miles. But once again, we see it's a mixed number, so we see that we need to change it to an improper fraction in order to solve it. So 4 times 3 is 12. 12 plus 3 is 15, and it's 15 over 4. And we end up with 30/12. And then we have to turn it back to an improper fraction, sorry, a mixed number. So when we do that, we have 2 6/12, which equals 2.5 miles. Now we're doing some simplifying. When we go back to our PEMDAS, So we're going to start with what's in parentheses and rewrite everything else. So this is in the parentheses, so we're going to get that answer first. So we see that we need to multiply and divide before we add and subtract. So we see this multiplication here. So we're going to do that next. And then we see some division, so we're going to take care of that next. And then we have our addition and subtraction in whatever order they come left to right. So that's first. And we end up with an answer of 9. And I'm going to circle my answer to make it stand out. Okay, next, question 14. We're going to make 4 dozen bagels. And for that 4 dozen, we need 3 eggs and a half a cup of butter. Jack decides he wants to make 8 dozen eggs. So 4 times what would give me 8? And I know the answer to this is 2. So all of the ingredients need to be multiplied by 2 then. So we got 3 times 2, which would give me 6 eggs. And a half a cup of butter times 2 would give me 2 over 2, which equals 1 cup of butter. Okay, now we have Caitlin, and Caitlin's making necklaces for her friends. She uses 3/5 of a 5-foot string for her necklace. And that's for Caitlin. 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 1 times 3 is 3, which would be 3 feet. But then it says she uses the rest for her friends, and it wants to know how long her friends is. So there's 2 ways to do this. I could say that I had 5 feet. She used up 3 feet, so that there's 2 feet. Or from the beginning, instead of 3/5, I can say we're doing 2/5 of 5, and we end up with 2 feet that way. And this would be the answer for her friend, which is the answer that we want. Question 16. We're working with fractions and decimals. So the first thing that I would do is take each of these fractions and make them out of 10 if I can, which in this case, for the first one, I can. So I'm going to look at this. 5/10 is it greater than, less than, or equal to 2/10? And I know that it's greater than. So the next one, we're going to take our half again, and we're going to change it to tenths. And 5/10 and 5/10 are equal. So now we have 1/5 and 1/5. When we turn it to 10, it's 2/10, and 2/10 and 2/10 are equal. And then again, I have 1/5, and this is 10, and it's 2/10. We end up with 2/10, and 2/10 is less than 5/10. So now we're on the next question, question 17. Jeff planned to run for 3/4 of a mile, but it started to rain, so he ran only half the distance. What fraction did Jeff run? So he did 1/2 of the 3/4 that he did. And when you do that, he ends up doing 3/8 of a mile. At the numerical expression, so first we need the sum. Sum tells me to add. So the sum of 2 and 4 subtracted from 9. So 9 needs to be in the front because it needs to subtract from 9. Question 19, we multiply straight across on problems like this. And in this case, I can divide them. So I'm going to start by dividing by 5, I see easily. And when I do that, I end up with 9/12. And I see that I can simplify even more if I divide by 3. And I end up with 3/4. Question 20. This takes a lot of steps. We need to read carefully and look at our conversions that they've given us. Eric's fitness trainer recommends that he drink 8 fluid ounces 6 times a day. So the first thing I'm going to figure out is that she wants him to drink 8 fluid ounces 6 times a day. So she is expecting 48 fluid, that's the FL, ounces, which is OZ. I'm going to keep reading. He has a water bottle that holds 1¼ pints of water when filled. Well, we want to look at how many cups and ounces because we're using fluid ounces and we need to convert our 1¼ pints. So if we have 1 cup, it's 8 fluid ounces. Then there's 2 cups over here that would be my pint. So if 1 cup is 8, 2 cups would be 16. So if I multiply this by 16, I'm converting this all to fluid ounces. So we're going to now turn this into a improper fraction because we keep talking about how that's what we need in order to multiply mixed numbers. And in this case, we end up with 80/4, which is equal to 20. But now we're going to keep reading, and it says, he has filled the water bottle 2 times and drank all the water. So this is for 1 time we just figured out, and now we need it for 2 times. So he has drank 40 fluid ounces. He claims he drank the total amount of water recommended by the trainer. Is this true? Well, he only drank 40 and he needs to drink 48. So this is not true because he needs to drink 8 more ounces. Next, last year, the farmer's market ordered 15½ pounds of apples. This year, they want to order 1¼ times as many pounds of apples. So let's start with that. We had 15½ pounds of apples, but we want to order 1¼ as much. We have 2 mixed numbers here, so we need to turn them into improper fractions. So we now have 5/4 because we do times and then plus. And over here we do times, which is 30, plus, which is 31. And we're going to actually solve this one straight across. And we end up with 155/8. Now normally I would say turn it to a mixed number right away, but let's keep reading and see what they want us to do. They want 2/5 of this order to be green apples. What's the total amount in pounds of green apples? So we want to multiply our answer times 2/5. So we want 2/5 of 155/8. And when we do this over here, we end up with 310/40. But the answer needs to be in a mixed number. So we're going to do this division down here for those of you who have a tougher time with that. So we end up down here with 7 and 30/40ths. And if we simplify it, it would be 7 and 3/10 pounds. Sorry, 3/4 pounds. And the last problem, which is another PEMDAS problem, parentheses first, so we're going to do 3 times 25 divided by 5. And then we do 3 times 25, which is 75 divided by 5. And then we finish it up with 15. And that is the review.